it kind of sets up the rest of the series. It's like, this guy is always going to be a leader.
Right, and it is always from the front, too. Like, he's not the kind of leader that just, like, hangs back and issues orders. He's always out in front and not content to order anybody else around. Like, his deal is that I have to do this because it's the right thing, and that's something that just, like, people can't help but gather around. And you mentioned sort of how he sort of clashes with modern sensibilities, and that's some of the most charming moments for his character. You know,
Right.
One of my favorite lines of his in the Avengers movie is when they're out in the Quinjet with Black Widow, and she's warning him about getting in between Loki and Thor. She says they're basically gods. And he says, "There's only one God, ma'am, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that."
I love that. I love that because just the high view and the traditions that shows, and then obviously for us as Christians, I mean, we're just like, applauding, because it's like, hey, that's really cool. Like, that's in a film by a major, studio that's being shown to the world, and it's this awesome movie. And this guy's character is true to the ideals that it ought to be, and it's not, it's not all washed over with. And I love that when you look at what developed in the Avengers, that they don't all have the same philosophy, and they're not all the same political standpoint, and that's what makes it interesting, because it's like you said earlier, is it's grounded in reality. It's not all larger than life. It's personalities that are very believable, placed in really crazy situations or given really crazy powers or resources, and it just makes it something that's really tangible and fun.
Yeah, and so one of the things, sorry, hold on. Let me start that over here. So in the Captain America film, one of the things I've been talking about for the other movies is what are some of the overarching sort of elements, what world building for the MCU did this film do? And obviously one of the hugest elements that this film brings in that is used a lot going forward is the Tesseract.
Sure. So early on in the film, right, the Nazis have the Tesseract. The Red Skull guy is going to, the supervillain of the film. He's going to use this as a powerful energy source. They're developing all these weapons, and basically you've got the Nazis, but then you have this super evil, super secret, whatever, Hydra growing underneath,
right,
and with way bigger implications than world domination of Nazism ideas, but and then this Tesseract that turns out to be one of the five, and you know the comics better than I do.
Yeah, it's actually six.
One of the six. So
yeah, there are actually 6 Infinity Stones. Yeah.
Forgive me, I have failed.
Boo. No.
Well, let's call it 5, and then it's an easier route.
Who needs the Soul Gem anyway? They still haven't introduced it. Nobody cares about that one.
Right. Yeah, I was taking inventory. But so let's see. So Howard Stark is able to recover. I think he recovers the Tesseract, right?
Yes.
And I don't honestly really remember what happens with that afterwards.
So what happens to that actually is you see that one again very briefly at the end of Thor.
Right. Okay.
When Nick Fury shows it to Dr. Selvig, and then you realize that Selvig is being influenced by Loki. And but one of the cool things about the Tesseract is that it sort of merges together another sort of artifact that is really prominent in the Marvel Universe called a cosmic cube. And that is something that the Red Skull has tried to get his hands on a lot. And in in the comics, the cosmic cube is a powerful cosmic artifact that can grant its wielder the power to reshape reality.
Gotcha.
And it was actually, I don't know if you have heard about this, but recently in the comics, a cosmic cube became sentient and sort of accident and had been influenced by Hydra in the development of its sort of consciousness and thought processes, and it rewrote, or rather now she rewrote Captain America's like personal like history in order to make him a Hydra deep cover agent. And we're actually just now at the end of this big event where Captain America is working for Hydra, and sort of Hydra takes over the world essentially through Captain America. And, you know, basically at the end of it, of course, all the pieces pretty much get put back together. And actually, I'm not 100% sure about what Captain America's status is at the very moment. But anyway,
but that is you know, an interesting plot device. It's often used in sci-fi, you know, especially as the idea of either a parallel world or an alternate timeline. That, you know, what if it had gone this way?
Right.
And it leaves open, you know, for different authors and for different, you know, writers to say, well, let's take it this direction. So, yeah, that's happening with Star Trek right now. You know, that's happened, you know, in smaller cases with the Flash and, you know, the Flashpoint saga, and just
obviously so Flash and time travel is a whole headache. And there's actually there's an entire podcast that was created a while ago where a husband and his wife were watching The Flash, and like a couple of these other characters with like Speed Force powers are showing up, and she asks him, you know, what in her mind is a very simple question is, oh, how many Flashes are there? And he's like, oh, well, let's talk about the DC multiverse, you know? And so now this whole podcast, it's called Journey into Misery. And like the whole podcast is just this guy explaining to his wife different like weird comic book stuff.
Yeah, because I mean, really, that's for me. I don't know. Like, I enjoy it more when it's grounded in reality a little bit, like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. When it gets totally into the theoretical, or what, you know, I would pretty staunchly say, okay, that's not possible, or that's not reality. I kind of fall off the bandwagon and get lost. Like that's where I say, like, I'm not a fully committed geek. Mm-hmm. But when you look at my interests and the things, you know, that I've already talked about today, it's like, yeah, that guy's a geek. But
well, and the cool thing about speculative fiction, and this is sort of for me, and and again, this is not my original thought. Many other people have said this before, but the point of science fiction and fantasy is to talk about big ideas in a context that is divorced from our everyday experience and our everyday assumptions. And so that we can kind of start to get our heads around these ideas without saying, oh, but it can't be this way because this is the way the world actually is. And it allows us to say, just as you mentioned earlier, well, what if the world was like this? And actually, and I've been thinking about this for a while. I think that this might be a reason why you don't see a lot of really good, at least, or you know, not much at all, of science fiction and fantasy that's written by Christians. Because the way that science fiction and fantasy sort of demands that you suppose a reality that is different from the one that we actually have, like that's enough to, you know, sort of set off some alarm bells in the heads of those Christians who are, you know, very, very conservative. And they, you know, and of course the gut reaction is like, oh, well, why should we want to, you know, suppose a world that's different from what we are? Didn't God make the best world possible? You know,
sure. I mean, you know, It's probably why, I mean, you go back to C.S. Lewis and you go back to Tolkien and you get, these great, you get the space trilogy from Lewis, you get Narnia, you get Till We Have Faces, you get, some of this other fiction that he put out, and you get, the whole realm of Middle Earth and all its history from Tolkien, and you don't see a lot after that, that, I mean, not that I'm familiar with, written by Christians that really has the same kind of impact.
Yeah, certainly nothing that has resonated in the popular consciousness the way that those works have. And I think what's really interesting is how so many Christians are willing to roll with that stuff and willing to see that as like valid and worthy of consideration. But anytime, you have worlds that like have magic as part of that universe, like that's just totally anathema, and it's a really crazy double standard that we're okay with the magic of Lewis and probably to a lesser extent for many the magic of Tolkien, but I was exactly I was in a Sunday school lesson the other day, and the guy who was kind of leading it started to harangue on Harry Potter. And I think the problem is that so many Christians are not willing to engage with things on their own terms. And we feel like we have to impose our values on things that aren't coming from a place that agrees with our values. And if we're ever going to understand this stuff, we have to be willing to set that aside for a moment, not in terms of how important it is or how we think that, this is how the world ought to operate. But if we're ever going to understand the things that aren't coming from our perspective, we have to learn to look at those things from a different perspective.
In their own right, looking at them from, still with our brains turned on, right? Of, what's this worldview and what is this encouraging or what's this valuing? But at the same time, being able to see like artistic creativity and depth of characters and creative plots and
absolutely,
and how much of it's truly original material and how much of it's just nuked in the microwave stuff we've seen before.
Right.
So I mean, I definitely agree with you there because, if it's original and it's new, it's like, okay, cool.
Yeah. Well, and for me,
worth at least looking at.
A really great recent example of this is Moana. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
I love this movie so much because I think as Christians, it has so much. There's so much there for us to love. There's a lot that we can see there that should really inspire some really hard discussions and some deep thinking about how we act as the church. In the beginning, they're talking about everybody on this island has a purpose on this island, and everything we need is here, and no one leaves. Like.
Sure.
And if you're the kind of Christian who is going to look at this movie and say, "Oh, we shouldn't watch that. That's all about pagan mythology," then
in reality, it's this idea of we need to branch out and we need to.
Right. Then this message is exactly for you. You are probably the person who is hanging out in a church where everybody is really comfortable in their little holy huddle and no one leaves.
Yeah.
And nobody comes there either, except the people who and then at the end, when Moana sees that Te Kā has the little thing on her chest that shows, oh, this is where the heart belongs.
Is where the heart belongs.
And she says and she starts singing that song, and everything just kind of slows down, and she says, "I know your name. I've come so far to find you." And they've taken the heart from inside you, but that does not define you. And I know who you are, who you truly are. And this is exactly what God is saying to us so much in our lives, that all of this pain and all of this crap that's happened to you in your life, like, this is not who you are intended to be.
That's pretty
you
cool.
are you